Good afternoon. I would like to call the November 19th meeting work session for the City Council together. We have three items on our agenda. The first item on our agenda is judicial evaluation, presiding judge reappointment. And shall I turn it over to Alana? Okay.
Good afternoon, councilors. Alana Holmes, Human Resources Director here at the City of Eugene. Today we're here for a work session and action item on the judicial evaluation and presiding judge reappointment. This agenda item is for the council to conduct presiding judge Wayne Allen's performance review. During the work session, councilors will meet with Judge Allen and discuss the evaluation results that you heard about last week from the committee who presented their results and findings and recommendations, and then make a decision on whether or not to reappoint Judge Allen to another 4-year term. So at this point, I would turn it back over to you so that you can facilitate the conversation with Judge Allen.
Great. At this point, we have had a presentation of the report from the Evaluation Committee, so I would open up if anybody has any questions or comments on the report or the evaluation.
I will.
Okay.
Having not appeared before Judge Allen or any of his fellow or any of the other judges, I would just like to say I really want to commend you on the commitment you have to the job, to the court system, the municipal court system, and particularly to the youth of our community. I think some of the programs that you run through the municipal court, particularly geared toward the college-age student, does a great deal for them in their growing up process. So, you know, along with everything else that we heard at the work session with the review, that's the only thing I would like to add, and I just want to commend you for that work that you do.
Mike.
Thank you. Judge, I want to congratulate you and thank you for the hard work, congratulate you on a stellar review, and say, just from my perspective, you don't ever get to retire ever, just in case you're wondering. And as my kind of comment on what I've seen over the now 8 years that I've been on council and watched how you administer that department of our city so well, I have had the opportunity to sit in court, not thankfully as a defendant in any way, but to observe other people's experiences there. There have been a couple occasions where I've witnessed a friend or an acquaintance have a difficult time with an interaction with someone else in the community and have to have that resolved in your courtroom, and watch the grace with which you've handled it. There was one case particularly where a friend of mine got hit by a drunk driver, and he used some really awful, inappropriate racial epithets at this person after he had hit her, because he was mad she was in his way, I guess, or something. He's drunk. And that had a very nice turn of events of not just prosecuting that fellow appropriately, but also with some restitution in an honorable way for the bias and for the bigotry that friend of mine had to endure. And I thought that situation was handled really appropriately and really well. So again, in all of my experiences, I just want to say thank you for all the hard work.
At the end of this round, I'll actually allow Judge Allen to make a couple of remarks as well. But anyway, we'll go to George.
Thank you, Council President. I 8 years ago, some years ago, did have occasion to appear in court, and it was for a very minor thing, a parking ticket or something, and I got the fine reduced. And while waiting for my turn to come before Judge Allen, I watched several other people there, and I was immediately struck by the respectful way everyone was dealt with and the fairness. And that's all corroborated in the reports that we've read from the people that reviewed Judge Allen's term, and I'm just very happy and very grateful that you're willing to serve 4 more years and keep doing this. I feel like
pay for it.
Oh, well, you haven't, okay, that's not
more than
official
that.
yet, but I mean, if you are, I'm very happy that you would consider, doing that. I know it can't be an easy job to do that all day long, every day, 5 days a week, and I'm happy if you decide that you want to continue doing that. Thank you.
Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Judge Allen, for the job well done over the years. How many years have you been sitting as a judge now?
40-some for a judge, and I've been the presiding judge for 20, and then I was the acting presiding judge during the year before I was appointed for another one. So
Over 20 years.
it's really
Here.
tough to do all that by the time you're 35, but I have.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought we had child labor laws, but apparently we don't. I congratulate you on the excellent review and the evaluations you got. It was stellar. I think you're well respected and do a fantastic job, and I'm happy to reappoint you as judge, presiding judge.
Great. Claire.
Yeah, I concur with the comments of my fellow counselors. I think we're very fortunate to have you as part of our community and in this particular role. I think, as I said at our work session the other day, that you've managed to, in spite of limited resources and many, many challenges, I think you've really created a bright spot in terms of delivery of service and continually seeking ways to make your court even a more fair, just, and accessible place for people in our community. So very, very grateful to you for that. And as noted, you are at the, perhaps could be considered at the end of a very honorable career, and others in your position might just kick back and relax and glide into retirement, but you are still continuing every day to try and improve our systems into the future. So the legacy that when you do decide, or when we decide to let you step down, you'll have a real legacy that you can be proud of and that we can all be proud of too. So I'm also am pleased to have an opportunity to reappoint you.
And I guess just to make it unanimous, I would agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said and reinforce it myself. So would you like to take an opportunity to say a few words?
I would. First of all, I would say, long time no see. I don't see the council enough, and you don't hear from a representative of the court, in my opinion, enough. I think there should be scheduled at least once a year an appearance by the presiding judge, whoever that is, to talk about the court and what the issues are and what the new programs are and how they're working, and kind of a state of the court. And I would suggest that maybe every spring we do that, and I'd like to do that as we move forward. Chris mentioned at the other session that, really I'm the one of three, and you see the other two certainly much more than you do me. And I think it's a good idea for a little bit better contact. And I would plead guilty to not having provided you with enough of that sort of thing. I mean, you can, I'm not the most computer-driven person, but I could be updating you, for instance, on our progress on community court, and should be doing that. And I should mention the challenges facing the court and some of the changes and some of the positive things we want to do and some of the things we need to improve on. 4 years ago, I said I wasn't going to do that whole 4-year thing, but the point is this court can be better, and the point is this is the court that has the most effect on the livability in this community, and I think we all recognize that. And what I would say is, let's invest more in this court. I don't mean just money, but I mean in terms of effort and so on. We're not going to get what we need from the district attorney's office. We're not going to get it from circuit court. We have to be on our own. And I think this court throughout the state stands on its own as kind of a creation that makes sense in this particular city. And this is a tough city, as one city manager said, to govern. But we have to, and we have to recognize the diversity of the kind of people we have. I mean, yesterday I had a guy who had been involved in 2 violent fights at bars and restaurants, one a year ago, one this year. Well, he's over in the Springfield jail for 40 days because he is a menace to the community. Well, that's not the same as the person who came in and was so alcohol affected, the person before him, the person he laughed at, who couldn't talk because she was so, I mean, I couldn't understand what she was saying. She wasn't intoxicated. She lives basically where the bicycles are stored in the little cage by the end of the court parking lot, which is pretty darn cold these days. So, I mean, those are two very vastly different things that I deal with back to back on the same day. I think it's mentioned in the report, to move on, that we've got some serious issues. The number one issue, as identified when we used the National Center for State Courts, and when we all went to the one-day the presentation, is the prosecution. They are overloaded. And when your prosecutor is overloaded, everything gets bogged down. And bogged down is not good in this court system. You don't want to tell a person who's worried about where they're going to sleep tonight and whether they're going to have any food and are they going to be warm enough, that, oh, we'll deal with your case 2 months down the road. Yesterday I was setting those cases for January 20 and 21. That's not okay. Those cases can be easily resolved. Most of our cases can be. Most of the people want to have them resolved. It's doing them a service to bring them back within 2 weeks and to get a resolution. But in order to do that, you've got to have a prosecutor's office who's able to get out the discovery and make the offers. And you have a terrific prosecutor now. You really have the right prosecutor for this city at this time as we try to move forward. But you need that, and you need, the second issue is we've got to get rid of our backlog. We have a huge backlog because of a number of factors, because we moved, because we had a new computer system, because the prosecution has always had the idea that if the police officer brings it in, they got to file it. Well, that's okay if you can process them, but you can't just keep filing cases and filing cases and filing cases when you can't prosecute them. Previously, before this prosecutor, the defense attorneys were not getting police reports for 7 weeks from the time they were appointed. We're now down to 1 week. We need to take advantage of that. We need to get rid of the backlog, and getting rid of the backlog isn't going to be easy. It isn't going to be pretty. You got to come in with a dull meat cleaver and eliminate those cases that just. There's certain cases that if a person is charged with criminal trespass and they haven't been a problem for a year, really, do we really need to bring them in and have a jury trial and go and not give them any I mean, we don't give significant sentences for those kinds of cases, particularly if you stayed out of trouble for that period of time. So some of these cases can be dismissed. Some of them can be disposed of rapidly with a favorable disposition, and others certainly need to go to court. But we need to divide them into these categories, and we need to move forward with that. So those are a couple of the issues. The third thing I'd say is let's double mental health court. I don't know, we're attracting a lot of people, or we have a lot of people, or I don't know where everybody's come from, but we've got a lot of mental health issues in our community. And if we can help on those mental health issues, that person isn't going to be on the street causing problems, making downtown a dicey place to go, having police officers pick them up repeatedly and take them to jail because they don't make their court appearances or they're causing trouble, whatever. If we can do that, the overall savings to the whole system are going to be enormous. But that's not the reason to do it. The reason to do it is it's the right thing to do. And I know every member of this council is trying every day to do the right thing, which is what we're trying to do too. So let's look at, in the next budget cycle, let's look at doubling mental health court. It's really been effective. We'll try to bring in some things that show how effective it is. I know there's not a lot of money here, but I think it's money well spent. And in terms of our community court, we have had the real focus for community court, or the real driver, is the Center for Court Innovation in New York. And community court started in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, and has spread from there. And you'll find that the people that have been doing what I've been doing for a long time, we all feel like it's, again, a better way to do things and the right way to do things. Instead of threatening and punishing, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, okay, let's have an assessment of this person. Let's find out what their needs are, and let's see if we can connect them to services that are going to solve the problem that caused their criminal behavior that brought them to court. That's what a community court is, and that's why it really fits with this community. And we have wide support. I think the council would support it. I know the city manager's on board. I know the police chief's on board. I know the court administrator brought that issue to the court when she came to the court a year and a half ago. And I know all the judges support it very much. So let's see if we can do it, but we can't do it until we get the backlog done and the prosecutor done. You've got to get these two giant rocks out of the road so you can move forward and look to the community court. So I think that's kind of that's the reason I'm still here, is I want to get these rocks out of the road, and I want to get to the carrot at the end of the road, which is community court. So I'd be happy to talk about any of those things with any of you. And maybe some of you haven't been to the court. If you have any interest in doing that, call me. I'll give you a tour. I'll give you a lunch. I'll give you whatever it takes to get you there and take a look at what we do. And I think you'll be proud of what we do. I hope you would.
Thank you for those very helpful and thoughtful remarks. For a second round, I have Mike.
Thanks, sir. Judge Allen, I also have the honor to serve on the police commission, and there are several folks who come off into police commission to give public testimony. One of the things we hear about frequently there are the folks who watch courts on an almost daily basis. Will sit in, and predominantly from their perspective, for seeing how police cases are handled throughout the process. But I also wanted to say that I also hear all of the stellar remarks about how things are resolved and how well the work's done in courts from a lot of those folks too. And we hear that pretty regularly at Police Commission. There's a recent development that has concerned me, and you touch on it a little bit here with the information from the prosecutor's office, having to do with how we deal with specifically downtown policing, because we've had changes in that in the last few years. We've added personnel, and I think that along with the development that we've seen in our downtown has begun to be a better place. It's attracting more people. We're going to be building more and more housing, and there'll be more and more people. But I think public safety in our downtown core is a key part of that. So for me, I have a concern when we talk about taking tools away from police officers to do their job of preventing conflicts and issues with people downtown. And so I hear and understand the importance of what you're saying with regard to a prosecutorial backlog. But at the same time, I feel a little bit reticent to take trespassing and other issues as tools away from officers on the street down there, because they end up preventing a lot of unfortunate conflicts when we essentially depolice in that way. So I'm wondering if you have any kind of advice about if the prosecutor is going to stop issuing as many citation, or excuse me, if the prosecution is going to stop, if the city prosecutor is going to stop prosecuting quite as many trespassing and other similar citations, and thus the officers are going to give out fewer of them, how would you advise that officer to do their job more effectively?
They can't. I don't support cutting cases, and I mean I may have to support it just to have a manageable docket. but I don't think it's a good idea to willy-nilly start dropping the cases that we prosecute. We have, over the course of a lot of years, reduced a lot of cases from misdemeanors to violations, so we've kind of done that. So, but at this point, you have 3,300 court-appointed cases a year. The standards for prosecution are very similar to defense. About 400 cases a year you ought to have. Well, you've got 2.5 FTE, maybe 2.7 FTE for prosecutors. There should be 8. I know there aren't going to be 8, but they can't do almost 3 times what they should be processing.
So forgive me if
you've either got to increase the capacity or you got to stop filing cases. And I agree with you. I think that the ability of the officer on the street to take somebody off the street who's causing problems, and particularly with the number of bars you've got downtown now, you've got to you've got to have that ability. So I hope we don't have to do that. I think we ought to hear from Christy Hammett, who's going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to look at the overall system here and see how we can improve it. So if that's okay,
I appreciate that, and I do want to hear that. One of the things that you mentioned was how at budget we ought to consider doubling mental health court, and I would tend to agree with you on that. I would think it's wise for us to consider giving the city prosecutor's office an additional degree of help in the same way. Because I think what we're going to see over the next, all the planning that we're doing and tying some of these pieces together in our work, we're going to see double the number of people living downtown.
Time. I noticed that 2 of these timers aren't working.
Yeah, this one's not working. All right.
So what I'll do is, if it's okay, I'll give
yes.
people time reminders so that they can.
If I could have another round, please, then.
Okay, I will do that. And what I'll do is I'll do Alan, and then I'll let you talk. Okay? All right. Alan.
I'd like to finish that thought first, if it's okay.
Okay.
I'm going to change the topic, so if you want to follow on this topic, that would be fine.
Okay.
Councillor Clark had something he wanted to
Did you want to finish your thought? Why don't you take an extra minute?
Just to finish that thought was that if we need to add prosecutorial resources in order to be able to deal with that, I'm in favor of looking at that, and the reason is because we're going to have, with all of our other work, maybe double the number of people living downtown in the next 5 to 10 years. And we're going to have more, with more people living more densely in a smaller space, we're going to have more potential for conflict. So if we're looking at long-term, how do we deal with this? Yes, some of those other alternatives are wise, but I certainly don't want to see us heading in the wrong direction with how we deal with those conflicts.
Okay, great. So if he's going to change the topic, then why don't you go ahead and speak?
Right. So one of the things I wanted to make sure that you all are aware of is that during Supplemental 1, you'll be seeing a request from us to take a big look at the entire system. And Judge Allen spoke to, some of the challenges at every single aspect. And so when we talk about, getting discovery out, there's some strains on the system that quite honestly, technology is creating. So Susan has worked really closely, our city prosecutors worked really closely with our IT shop to figure out how to address, the video that's coming in. So there's the body cams, there's the in-car video, and so some of those things, just in terms of how we get that information ready and out for discovery, have been challenges, and so some of that contributes to the backlog. And so we're going to step back. We're going to take a look at the entire system from kind of the start of when the information flow starts to when it's finished, and try to figure out how do we make that system more efficient as a whole. What things do we need to be considering? And we'll actually be thinking about more in the terms of a report and recommendations that would come back. But right now, it's kind of I think the whole system's in a state of flux. We've changed technology that we're using in the departments, and every single one. The city prosecutor's office hasn't been able to implement their technology yet, which creates bottlenecks. So we'll be looking at that. The other thing I would add, so that I just wanted to make you aware, there are conversations underway about how do we sort of stop the bleeding, if you will, with the system right now in terms of some of the challenges that we're facing, trying to get creative in the short term while we take a long-term look and a long-term view at things, which I think is really warranted. And Chief Kearns and Glenn Klein and I have all been talking about that. We've also talked with the city manager, and so we're all really supportive of doing that, and as is Judge Allen. The other thing I would say is that you mentioned, dismissing cases. There have been no decisions to do anything like that in terms of taking tools away from the officers that need them on the street. In fact, the conversations that I have been in have been more around how do we make sure that we don't limit the tools that the officers need on the streets. And so those have been some insights from some of the meetings I've been in as recent as this week. So just wanted to share that with you as well.
Great, thank you. We'll have Alan in the second round, and then I'll ask Claire to put the motion on the table. Alan.
Yeah, I agree with your comments about the mental health court and the community court, and I think it's about time we started looking at the budget of the court more seriously. I think part of you did such a great job. We don't hear about, and government works on squeaky wheel, and so that gets everything's fine over at the court. We don't have to think about it. And so that's a problem that we need to think about. And maybe when you come back in the spring, which I think is a great idea, maybe even twice a year, that may be one of the areas you can focus on before we head into the budget process. That would be very timely. One of the things you mentioned in the evaluation was the option of adding a veterans court. And I was wondering what specifically you were thinking about and how that would work and whether that would require a budget change.
The nice thing about a veterans court is there are resources for vets. The challenging thing for a regular community court is how do you get the providers of different services in the community to have even more capacity or more ability to deal with people, whether it's Lane County for mental health or whether it's Crystalis or whether it's Emergence or whoever it is. But the thing about a vets court is there's a lot of push for it now. There's a lot of funding for it now. The idea is to get every vet housing and so on. So I think that's a good starter for the community courts concept. We already have community court in a lot of ways. The restorative justice thing for the university students, basically the noise and so on, the unruly gathering, that's what that is. The mental health court clearly is a big component of any community court system. So those are some of the things that we look at. So the veterans court is, I think, a good place to start. Then you start thinking, okay, where else is the need in the community, and what does the community feel? We have a community survey that talks to that issue, and what does the community feel are the issues that we ought to be dealing with. And you have the parks people come in and say, folks, there are all kinds of people out there on the bike paths and so on, and there are all kinds of unhoused people, and there are all kinds of needles and all kinds of madness going on out there. Well, is that a place that we would maybe focus on, bring them into court, and try to help them? I don't know. I mean, those are some of the things you think about. Community courts are different all over the country. Spokane has a terrific one, and my theory is if Spokane can do it, Eugene can do it. And they basically have a number of providers in the courthouse area, and they're there when people come in for their they had to do the evaluation, and they're there. You can say, see that person, see this person, and so on. We also, I should have mentioned, recently met with Lane County regarding housing in general, and what I learned was that there are really housing opportunities that people don't know about and don't get on the wait list. They don't know how to do it. So Lane County has agreed to get us a handout, and we'll start making inquiry at the front desk and in the courtroom and so on. How you doing for housing? Do you need somebody? You need to know how to contact people. Even though people may go to the dining room and use other services, they really don't necessarily know who or what to do for housing. So we're going to be doing that as another outreach.
Good. When I helped start the Safe and Sound project, one of the things we quickly realized is that the people who need these services don't come in and ask for the services because they don't really know about them. You really need to do the outreach, and one of the things we provided was counselors that went out and talked to people about these and brought them into the system because they didn't know how to access it. So I think that's really important. Do it a Veterans Court can do that within your existing budget, or is it part of community court? How does that work?
You have to decide on a community court whether you're going to be basically monitoring on a regular basis like you do at mental health court. So are you going to bring them back in a week and go, did you do what I told you to do? Did you contact that person? How's it going? Are you on the housing list? Those sorts of things. Or are you simply going to give these referrals and hope it works? If you give the referrals, then from a financial standpoint, you're not going to have a reappearance that involves staff, that involves a prosecutor, that involves a defense attorney, that involves a judge. So I think you have to tailor it to whatever it is you're doing. The Center for Court Innovation is preparing an assessment tool for misdemeanors. Most of the assessment tools have been more for felonies, so you need to have that rather quick but accurate assessment for the defendant in order for you to figure out what it is you want to steer them toward.
I'm glad.
If you go back to the committee that the city manager put together, the committee to develop a path to end the downtown public safety zone, and you look at, and I was part of that, if you look at those recommendations, the first recommendation, if you read what they're saying alternate sentencing practices is community court. The second one that they're recommending is mental health court, clearly. So, you know, I think it's coming around so that people recognize what we can do better, and how we can have a bigger effect on the livability of our community and help people along the way.
You also mentioned restorative justice. That was my final question. I don't think most people are actually aware that there is a restorative justice system that we set up and worked with the University of Oregon, and I followed it because that's in my ward. Maybe you can describe that a little bit and talk to folks.
And it's modeled on the restorative justice program in Boulder, and it's designed for students that have too much fun and who feel, that I'm a student, that's what students do. The neighbors need to get used to it. If they don't like it, they ought to move out of the neighborhood. So what I reviewed that, and I was really impressed with the comments from the people that went through it. And it was really a growing process. It was really a process where they went, wow, I look at things differently now, basically. That's what restorative justice is about. So for some reason, we're not getting a lot of unruly gathering cases. That was what it was designed for.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to do is to apply it to just plain noise cases, because I think that people are getting cited for noise now, and that's kind of the end
parties.
of it, and not many unruly gathering for some reason. But the noise is perfect for them to come in and have a panel of people say, here's what you're doing, here's how you're affecting the neighbors. I mean, sometimes it can be the actual victim, the neighbor next door, who calls. But if they don't want to, you have a regular panel who comes in and kind of, in a light but direct way, tries to educate them to the responsibilities of being an adult citizen in whatever community you're presently residing. So that's what restorative justice is, and I think it also has promise to use in theft cases. So people start going, well, wait a minute, I'm stealing this stuff. What am I doing here? How am I affecting, for instance, the jobs of the people that work here and so on? What's the effect of my behavior? And it kind of makes you think, well, maybe that's not the best idea. So like to move that in two directions.
Yeah, I think the restorative justice is really about showing people the impacts of what they're doing, right. and I think applying it to the noise is really good. I think that unfortunately, we don't get to apply it very much because the social host ordinance actually does what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to scare people into not doing illegal activity, and I think it's worked. And I think we've seen a drop-off in those kind of people doing it over and over again anyway, and it's really been a valuable tool to get us to do that.
Universities really helped out and stepped up and gotten involved, and I think that's a really good development for us as we move through, to have a closer relationship with the university on some of these mutual problems.
Yeah, I
You
think
know, and you got to wonder, as one of the council people said, how much is it costing to process university cases, and should we get some contribution there? So I haven't forgotten that comment.
Incidental fees.
also, when we did the walk around welcome this year, we handed out the piece on the social host ordinance and the rules around that, and I was surprised. It was almost universally that every student knew what we were talking about. So they've got the message.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's why I think we move it down to noise, because I think
Yeah, it's good,
noise
yeah.
is, you know, we didn't know how many cases we were going to have. So now that we have fewer cases, we've got room to do that, and we've got a very anxious group up at the university that'd like to have some more cases come their way.
Yeah, and we also have the code of student conduct is now applicable outside just the confines of the campus. So hopefully you won't be seeing any of that, but maybe the university, that's a way for them to contribute their portion of keeping people in line and accountable.
Great. Movement's always important as long as it's in the right direction, even slowly. I'd like to ask Claire to put the motion on the table.
I move to reappoint Wayne Allen as presiding judge.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise their hand. Any opposed? It passes unanimously, which is exactly the way it should be. Thank you very much, Judge Allen. We will now move to our second agenda item, which is adoption of an ordinance suspending multi-unit property tax exemption program, or continuing the exemption, I should say. City Manager?
We're prepared to answer questions if you need those answered. It seems like it's pretty straightforward, but we're happy to talk more about that if you need it.
Okay. I will open it up if anybody has any additional questions on the topic of extending the suspension to date in February. Seeing none, I would ask the City Council Vice President put the ordinance on.
I move to adopt Council Bill 5133, an ordinance included as Attachment A to extend the program suspension to February 28th, 2000. It says 14, but I think it means 15. To February 28th, 2015.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Councilor Polling.
Yeah, hang on just a second. I think that by extending this out even farther, I think that I won't say gives us an excuse, but makes it easier for us to draw this 2-year process out even farther. We started this 2 years ago come February. We have at least one well-developed and thought-out and beneficial project in the waiting, and Mr. Obie came to talk to us about that the other night at the public hearing. So, in the long run, we the council still get the final say on a MUMPTI application. So it would be my intention to let's go ahead and let this suspension expire, so that there are people that do have projects in the waiting and just been, waiting for months and years, go ahead and let them apply. And like I said, we do get the final say on it. And then if it's, voted down, then they can wait until if and when we ever get the final resolution on this. But, in particular, like the project that Mr. Obie is proposing, I'm sure that if you go through the current proposal for the new MUPTI rules, he either meets or exceeds all of those. So I would move that we, I guess it would be a substitute motion to move to take no action and let the suspension expire December 1, 2014.
There is a substitute motion.
For the sake of discussion.
And it's been seconded for sake of discussion. Did you want to speak to it? Okay. Is there any discussion on the substitute motion, George, and then Mike, and then Claire?
Works for either motion.
Well, the reason we're extending it is because we're not done. We're far from done, in my opinion. Reworking the old one, which we all agreed was no good. It was just so full of flaws. And we haven't seen Mr. Obie's proposal, really. I mean, I remember reading an article in the paper about it months ago, but we have really don't know any of the details. And to hurry and rush this thing for one person is, in my view, totally improper, because it's going to be a thing that's going to affect the whole city. And frankly, I don't see the big hurry, because the February date, that will be about a 2-year suspension. And you think, well, oh my God, no one's going to build anything without the MUPTI. But just look around town. There's been projects, big projects, all over town that have been constructed without MUPTI. And so, yes, Goodpasture Island Road. There's been a development on Coburg. There's been several projects in the university area. There's a huge one going in on Garden Way off of Franklin. There's lots of multifamily housing is being built without MUPTI. I don't believe. Well, you say all students, but you know what? The Fair Housing Act, anybody can live in those. Okay, so we can't differentiate. There's going to be non-students living in them. In fact, there are now. Some of the ones that received MUPTI being built as student housing. There are non-students living in those, and I'm thinking of the Pearl specifically, but I know it's going on at all of them. So, you know, a couple more months isn't going to kill anything. People just have to be patient. I don't really buy some of the logic of, seems to me like the site that Mr. Obie's thinking of developing. I don't see any special problems with that site. I think it could be developed without MUPTI personally. But anyway, I won't support this particular motion. I will support the first motion to extend the extension a couple more months. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, sir. I will say that I agree in principle with what George is talking about, that in places where development occurs naturally under conditions of market sets, I'm fine with letting that be the way we do business. That's absolutely the way it should be. But in specific areas, it won't happen without help, and downtown's one of them, and that's one of our biggest goals. Let's see more people live downtown. It'll make downtown safer. It'll make downtown better. So it won't happen if left to the market. It absolutely is not affordable. It doesn't pencil out, and we won't see anywhere near the number of people living downtown that we hope to with the planning work that we've done. Now, as to Mr. Obie's project, I've spoken with him, and so he hasn't made a presentation of that to all the council and to the general public, but I've spoken with him just because I'm interested in what he's got going there and asked him about it, and I've seen that, and I agree with George that knowing what he has planned, I can see that all of the things that he has planned will meet or exceed the sort of standards, the new standards, all of which we've talked about setting. And so I'm caught in an odd position. I want us to do this the right way, to do it effectively, to agree on all the pieces, but I also don't want to put that project, a wonderful addition to our downtown, potentially at risk by just saying, nah, we'll wait. So I'm going to turn to the city manager now, and I'm going to say, what would be the likely effect of our substitute motion, and do you, based on your knowledge or staff's knowledge, find it imperative that we address this in some way now with regard to Mr. Obie's project?
Amanda might know better about Brian's project, specifically the timing of that. If the suspension does not go through, it essentially brings the original ordinance back into play. Denny, you can probably talk about, or Amanda specifically, what that ordinance would do, or what it currently would do.
Well, if the motion passed, I think the program would go into effect in its old form. I think that's the reality. The question about Obie's project, we've been working with him closely for many months now. I think part of his project concept is ownership. So in order to build ownership product, you have to get out and market those units before they can be financed for construction and so forth. So I think the intent is to start doing that in the near future, is my understanding. There's another project that hasn't been mentioned, but it's Ralph Brokaw's project, if you recall, and I think that one actually is further along, maybe even than Obie's project. They've done some initial design work and cost estimating, and in our conversations with them, they're waiting for this to be resolved before they spend any more money on it.
Do we see a timing problem, a consequence of those projects potentially being in jeopardy if we were to wait and not reinstitute it till such a time as we're complete with the revisions?
The two biggest risks are probably interest rates and construction cost, and we're in an environment right now that is favorable. And as time elapses, there's things that you can't control that could happen to projects. We've seen projects, for example, fall apart because steel and concrete costs went up and our interest rates go up. So there is some risk. Time kills a lot of projects just because of external factors beyond your control sometimes.
Thanks. I don't want to put the old rules back into effect, even though
I'm sorry.
I said I don't want to put the old rules back into effect, even though I thought the wisest way for us to go first was to revise it and put it into place once it's revised, so we wouldn't be caught in the position we're in right now with this question. I'm not sure how I'll vote at the moment. Thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. So I'll probably vote against the substitute motion. I understand the logic of Councillor Polling, and partly because Mr. Obie's project is in my ward, I actually have sat down with him and reviewed some of the particulars, and I agree. I think it will be a very viable and positive project that would probably score, quote unquote, very well under either version of our MUPTI. But I think we put some really good work into these revisions. I think Alan has some good ideas for strengthening some of those, and I think the project can wait a couple of more months while we tighten those things up. Hopefully a majority of council will support the program revisions and we can get this back online. My question, which would apply to either motion to the city manager, is if we did vote to extend the suspension to February 28th, and then we in early January, let's say, miraculously wrapped up our MUPTI conversation and passed a revised program, how soon would that new program come online?
And that's probably a legal question. I assume it'd be 30 days after the ordinance's effect. Now, we are coming back on December 8th.
Right.
And our best outcome is actually we get wrapped up, or pretty darn close to wrapping up around that, because part of this is for the downtown development, particularly some projects. The eWeb project redevelopment also eventually will play into that. And as you know, through the technical resource groups, infinite amount of data collection and analysis has said that without a MUPTI in place or something similar, and we don't have anything similar, that is an important part of our compact urban development pillar in Envision Eugene. And so if we don't have something like that in place, what that means is we may have to actually expand the urban growth boundary more to accommodate those additional 1,500 units. And so that's the other piece in addition to the downtown development.
Right. So I think, most likely scenario, we're talking the difference between a month in terms of when the program comes online again. So I'll vote against the substitute motion and for the main motion.
I put myself in the queue. There's an enormous pressure here that the suspension or the extension of the suspension is really not the core here. It's why we need the extension, and what would the result of that be? Yeah, we've been doing this for 2 years, and I think we've done an incredible amount of good work in 2 years, and I would be reluctant to put that hard work on the back burner and then just bring the old MUPTI back because of feeling time pressure. On the other hand, delaying all the way to February does seem like a long time, particularly for something that's been going on for 2 years, and I feel we're this close to being done. So I think Claire's point was the same one I was going to bring up, that the extension may be to the furthest out date, but I would hope that we could finish up these last few things and get this thing wrapped up in December, hopefully, so that even if we did extend the suspension to February, I would do it without the expectation that we're going to go all the way to February. I still want to go full bore to try to get this thing finished. And I think there's only just a few questions left. So I think I could support the extension on that basis, with the expectation that my best case scenario is the one that we could achieve, that we go ahead and extend it just to protect ourselves, but that we are still working at full speed to try to get this thing done in December, because for me, I think that's the most important thing. I want to see us get this thing done quickly. I want to see us complete it. It's been good work, and there's no reason to drag this out any longer than it needs to be. So with that in mind, I appreciate where George is coming from, and I want to get to the same place he does. I just probably wouldn't do it the same way. But I think that interest, that desire, is where we all want to be. And so I'll vote against the substitute, but I'll vote for the motion to suspend with the expectation, at least personally, that we'll be able to act sooner than that. Next is George Poling.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, my comments were misrepresented. I wasn't trying to single out any one person. I was using the OB project as an example because I knew there were other projects in the waiting. So I'm sorry that the conversation went basically toward specifically one project. That was not my intent. Again, by having this suspension expire, it goes back to the old rules, which is, the way it should be, the way it would happen. But the council, again, has the final say. And my concern is that this is going to be purposely drug out longer than February 28th. And I just would like to see the projects that are out there that are ready to go, or that are thinking about ready to go, at least have some way to proceed with an application process, even if at the end of the process the council votes it down. At least that end of the project can get started, and that's why I brought that forward, and not because of one particular person or project.
Sure. Thank you for that clarification. Alan.
Yeah, I don't want to see the old rules be put back in place. I haven't heard of any projects that are actually ready to file, and it's unlikely to hurt those projects. Are working on this a little bit longer. I think deadlines are good. I think they keep our feet to the fire. We're close to wrapping up. We're not there yet. I think there's some more things to do to it, and we could be done early. So I won't support the substitute motion. I would like to add one more thing, since we're talking about this, to the items for discussion on the revisions. One of the things that came up at the public hearing was the a maintenance fund requirement that was brought up in the public hearing. I'm not sure if I support it, but I'd like to learn more about that.
Okay, that's everybody I have in the queue. So we have a substitute motion on the floor. Does anybody need to have it reread? Are we clear? All those in favor of the substitute motion, please indicate by raising their hand. Any opposed? The substitute motion fails. So we are back to the main motion regarding a suspension to February 28th. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising their hands. Any opposed? It passes 5-1. Thank you all. We will now move to our third item, which is a work session on public passenger vehicles.
I'll turn over to Sarah and her team.
All over the board on the agenda today. It's kind of
You're
fun.
all Uber this?
All over this. God.
Hi. Already?
No, I'm not laughing at that. No, there's no way. I'm just not laughing at that.
Can't make me say it. So today we're going to talk to you about public passenger vehicles in Eugene. I'm joined by Laura Hammond and Rochelle Nicholas from PDD, so we're going to kind of do a joint presentation. I'm going to start us off, and then I'll hand it over to Laura. So what we hope to do today is take you on a short but informative journey into the topic of public passenger vehicles in Eugene. Our goal today is to provide you with a brief overview of the history and regulatory framework of public passenger vehicles in Eugene and Springfield, because we do cover Springfield as well. Introduce you to some of the new technologies that have emerged since Council last updated the code, and how they relate to our current regulations, and our plan and next steps for how we can ensure Eugene and Springfield adapt and stay safe for the community. So, promise not to take you on too long of a journey all the way back to 1928, but we did think you would find it also very interesting to look at how some of these regulations emerged. So the first ordinance that we could find regulating taxi cabs and vehicles for hire was passed by the Eugene Council in 1928. And we couldn't find a lot of information about whether there was an incident or something that happened. This seemed to be a trend that was happening across the country. But the one reference that was made in the ordinance was to the congestion of downtown parking. So all of my worlds are colliding over and over again. It was probably shortly after that we put meters in.
To our eternal shame. Go ahead.
And so anyway, in 1928, the very first ordinance actually provided for licensing of each taxi service and a permit for drivers. So it's essentially very similar to what we have now, innovative at the time and still innovative today. And while it seems like a long time ago, the first documentations of regulations relating to vehicles for hire and public passenger vehicles is actually found in London in 1605. So for 409 years, public passenger vehicles have been a part of our human culture and a significant part of our transportation inventory. I'm going to hand this back to Laura, and she'll go through some of the details of the program.
Hi, my name is Laura Hammond. I work with the Planning Development Department. I'm going to talk briefly about our current PPV, or public passenger vehicle regulations, and what they cover. Then describe some of the new technologies that are emerging in this industry. Talk a little bit about how they work and how they relate to our current code, and then finally present a proposed code change for your consideration. So today, our PPV regulations cover any vehicle used for the transportation of passengers for hire. And that includes taxis, shuttles, horse-drawn carriages, and with recent adjustments to our administrative rules, we've also added pedal-powered passenger vehicles to that list. Local regulations live in two areas, the city code and then the administrative rules that enact that code. The city code provides a broad definition of PPVs. It establishes the licensing requirements, the screening requirements, the fare charging requirements, and requires the adoption of administrative rules. The code also requires that any PPV serving the airport has to be authorized by the city. Most of the details, however, of our code live in our administrative rules. The rules describe in more detail the driving application process, the insurance requirements, and the vehicle requirements. For example, this is where you'll find requirements that PPV companies maintain a minimum of insurance coverage that's outlined by the state statute, that vehicles are inspected every 6 months and have safety equipment like seat belts and fire extinguishers, and that vehicles are marked with their permit number and their company name. We also require drivers to be certified through the city, which includes submitting an application for a criminal history and driving record check. The admin rules provide specific regulations for each type of PPV company. Often it's new innovations like the recent PubCycle or pedal-powered vehicle that reveal that we need to make updates to those rules. And in that case, we were able to add a new category to our administrative rules to cover those vehicles. So we were able to have a new company operating and still maintain our safety standards. So as noted, we have updated administrative rules more recently, but the code hasn't changed since 1992. And as you can imagine, there have been a few changes since that time, especially related to the technology that's available to connect drivers and riders. A number of smartphone applications have emerged that can directly connect PPV drivers and passengers for the purpose of dispatching and having you pay for your fare. This slide shows just a couple examples. It also includes the Oregon Taxi app, which was recently developed for our community. So in case you haven't had an opportunity to try out one of these new apps yet, I thought I'd walk you through what that might look like. Instead of calling into your central dispatch office, a prospective passenger downloads an app to their smartphone and sets up an account. You can input your location when you're ready for a ride, and the phone's GPS coordinates transmit that to the potential drivers. For many models, you can also add your destination, and it'll help calculate what your approximate fare would be. Most applications will show a map of the vehicles that are available in your area and let you know how far away in minutes your next ride might be. With some models, you may also get the name of your driver, and you get to see a rating of that driver. Once the driver accepts a ride request, they're dispatched to your location based on your phone's GPS coordinates. You get a ride. And once that's complete, your fare is charged. Now, many apps offer to do this electronically. There's no cash involved. It's completely through your phone. Some also provide a cash option. There's also often an opportunity to rate your experience, and that rating can be shared with other app users. So, along with these new technologies, a couple new business models have also come on the scene. These allow drivers to use their own personal vehicle to provide rides, and you may have heard of some like Uber, but there are others like Lyft and Sidecar. Each has a little bit different take on the idea, but they're essentially the same in that drivers use their own cars to provide rides, and riders hail them through an app-based system. Again, it's just an example of a similar process that uses a smartphone app to transmit the location, the rider accepts the ride, and the payment process is done electronically. The insurance coverage for these types of drivers is different than the traditional PPV company, which typically will insure their entire fleet 24/7. According to their fact sheet, Uber drivers are required to have their own personal insurance coverage, but as soon as they accept a ride request, the company's commercial insurance coverage kicks in and is covered through the end of the ride. So how do these new technologies and models fit with our current code? I think similar to many other communities across the country, including our neighbors to the north in Salem, our current code wasn't really written with these sorts of technologies in mind. Even so, Eugene's code does have a broad definition of what a public passenger vehicle is, and the city attorney's review of these models determined that they do fit within our current definition and can be included in it. I'd say another advantage for Eugene is that we do not have, unlike cities like Portland or Seattle, we do not have a cap or limit on the number of PPV licenses that are available in our community. So there's no barrier to entry into the market. And the new technologies do offer community members a convenient transportation option. There are some areas of the code and the administrative rules, however, that could be updated to better align with these new technologies. And to that end, we're bringing this proposed code change to you today that would more clearly authorize smartphone technologies that have been developed in the PPV industry. The proposed code change for consideration in a possible public hearing would simply add smartphone applications as a means of calculating a fare charge, which is currently limited in the code to a meter calculated rate or minimum fare that's posted on the interior or exterior of the building or the car. If this code was changed, we would also begin reviewing and potentially seeking public input on some possible updates to the administrative rules. These updates would be aimed at removing barriers to new technologies, but also maintaining our current safety standards. Today, however, we are focused on a relatively small change to the code that would allow all PPVs to take advantage of the new technology, and that would help ensure that they could all be licensed and operating under the same rules. The change could also send a positive message about Eugene being a community that's open to innovation, but most importantly, it would ensure that we're maintaining important community safety standards.
So this is going to probably seem redundant, but I want to be really clear about what the next steps are and what we're doing today and essentially what we're not doing today. So as Laura explained, the Eugene Code sets a broad framework for public passenger vehicles that points to the administrative rules for establishing the foundation of safety and operating requirements. When you hear the term, we want an even playing field, the majority of the field is actually in the administrative rules. The code amendment we have proposed is necessary to support all public passenger vehicle companies that are utilizing smartphone or app-based technologies. This is a technology our largest public passenger vehicle company, Oregon Taxi, is utilizing, and this code change supports their efforts to innovate. Your action today would schedule a public hearing on that one addition to the code. That would happen sometime after break if you want to do that. The administrative rule review and any potential updates will be a comprehensive and inclusive process, starting with our partners in Springfield, because as I mentioned, our code actually applies to Springfield, and we know from their staff and elected officials that they have an interest in discussing this as well. We have mentioned before that we've been in regular conversations, but we want to engage them more thoroughly. And we will also provide regular updates to you on the progress of that work and what might happen with the admin rules. As we said before, the pedal taxi is a good example of one where There was a lot of, you had a lot of emails from the company that wanted to come here, and we worked through a pretty thorough process to make sure that things would line up. We went on test drives with them, with Eugene Police, and eventually found a way to kind of carve out a piece of the code. This would be much more complicated than that because there's a lot of things at stake, and so we just want to assure you that we'll be thorough and keep you in the loop and open it up for discussion.
So what I will do is, if we haven't already gotten there, I will interrupt the proceedings at 20 minutes after 1 to make sure that we get that one ordinance, public hearing provision voted on, so we have a decision. Otherwise, we do want to have a conversation not only about that, but also the initial conversation on our interests with regard to both the proposed ordinance code and how that would influence administrative rules. Does that seem fair? Seem accurate? Okay, then I will proceed into the queue, and the first person I have is Mike.
Thanks, sir. I will likely support this ordinance change because it makes some sense. There's a piece to it that gives me concern, and I'll urge my friend from the Register Guard over there to be careful about how he writes, because Uber came after a journalist the other day and for writing something badly about them, and recommended in an article yesterday that I read that they do a personal investigation of the reporter and come after them for not writing nice things about Uber. So I'll give you a caution up front. If hypothetical situation, yeah, I know. Well, I'm already in trouble, so I might as well. I want to ask you a hypothetical question here. If Oregon Taxi or another current taxi service provider with a new app were to pick up a fare, drop them off, and do the automatic online charge that, say, was double or triple what they agreed to up front, and they just took it out electronically because that's how it's set up, how would we respond to that taxi company?
Want to answer that?
So I don't know if this is working. So right now, there's a requirement within the rule that talks about maximum rates.
Right.
And so there's a cap on how much they could charge.
Right. And so if they decided to do it anyway and triple somebody's charge, what would we do?
We would issue them an order to correct and require them to.
What if they said, go jump in a lake, we're doing it anyway? I know this sounds funny, but I'm asking, this is going to lead to a very important point.
So our code compliance process is typically we have a relationship with the companies right now. So we're going to call them and say, we've got this complaint.
And I do know you work with them regularly, but my point we're getting to is because they're licensed,
right.
The threat is comply or we'll pull your license, right?
Right.
So I'm perfectly willing to put this into place, but Uber's not licensed, and none of the other rideshare places are. So when we get to a place where they triple charge somebody, and we say, oh, you can't do that, they can look at us and go, sorry, we don't care. And we don't have a license to pull, so, stick it in your ear. That's a problem for me that we need to iron out before I think we get to applying this ordinance, so that everybody's working on the same playing field, because they're definitely not. There are other problems as well, but I don't need to beat those up today. I'm sure we're going to address them.
Correct.
Yeah, it's only the first conversation. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, next in line is Alan.
Yeah, the reason we regulate these folks is to make sure they're insured, make sure the vehicles are safe, and the drivers are not criminals and have bad driving records, and regulate fair fares. And all of that applies regardless of technology to me. And in fairness to the existing folks that have to comply with all of those regulations, they have to come up with the insurance, they have to come up with the vehicle inspections, and they have to run their drivers through criminal background checks and driver checks, and they get regulated under the system for making sure that their fares are fair. And just because you have a new technology doesn't mean that all that goes out the window. It still applies. And if I have friends that are, or young folks that are wanting to use new technology to get a ride, I want to make sure that they're safe and that everything's on the up and up. and I don't think there should be a competitive advantage to folks by getting out of all those licensing, insurance, safety requirements and put people at risk. So I'm in favor of moving forward to a public hearing at least and hear what people have to say.
Thank you. Next is Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the comments of Mike and Alan. I agree with them in whole. And I recognize we are addressing one little aspect here, but I also have other concerns and issues, and so I'll just throw a couple of them out here, and then we can for a later discussion. But we have extra requirements for folks who want to serve the airport, and I wonder how Uber would fall under those, since they don't seem to want to fall under the ones we have for the rest of the city at this point. The issue of insurance, it's easy to ensure that a fleet is covered with insurance, but how do we regulate individual cars that are engaged in commercial purposes like this? And the price variability, part of Uber's business model is to charge different rates at different times depending on demand. Now, in our market, that may not come into play the way it might in a major metropolitan area, but how, does that play into this situation where we're demanding that you post your rates up front and someone knows before they get in your vehicle what they're going to be charged, more or less, at least per mile. But in terms of the particular thing before us, much like my colleagues who just spoke, I'm all for bringing our code up to date to address changing technology and allow business to use that to improve service to customers. But that doesn't mean creating a kind of a free-for-all that undermines responsible businesses and puts customers at risk for being charged different pricing from what's being advertised, or some other risk that our current code is designed to protect them from. So I'm fine with supporting this for a public hearing. I think it makes sense, but I really want to support staff in holding folks accountable to our current code, and I think you've been working on that, and keeping I think what we have is a good system. It protects folks. We have viable taxi businesses that do well, and I don't want to see us messing that up because someone might write a bad email to us because they don't like how we talked about their company.
Thank you. Next is George Poling.
Thank you. I think Mike, Allen, and Claire pretty much stated everything that I was going to say, but when we're looking at the administrative rules, I think we also look to maybe put a little more teeth in the enforcement end of it, to address the non-compliant company or companies, however it might be. But as far as the public hearing is concerned, despite my lack of ability in modern technology and the technical skills, I'm all for the advancement of the technology. So if having a system like that is working, I'm all for it. So let's move forward with the public hearing.
Great. I put myself in the queue. I don't believe the role of the City Council is to block innovation or initiative. I think, if anything, we should be supportive and encouraging of innovation and initiative. And at the same time, we're in these offices to protect the public from safety issues and from unfair or inappropriate commerce or business activities. And I think that's what this is boiling down to. We want to be supportive of innovation and initiative and encourage that in whatever way we can, but not at the expense of the public, either the public safety or the public's right to have fair commerce and transactions. And I don't see those as being mutually exclusive. I think with some thoughtfulness and some creativity and some input from this body, we can absolutely arrive at something that works effectively. I have confidence in the thoughtful process for administrative rules. I think we should provide you with our interests so those can go into the code, and the code is clearly representative of what our interests are. But I think that the administrative rules, because they are so highly technical and they are so detailed, should really be driven by those interests and not by non-professional people trying to play professional. That doesn't mean we wouldn't be involved in reviewing and feeling those administrative rules were still reflective of our interests, but I don't want to pretend I'm an expert, but I do want to have a voice, and I think that's not a difficult thing to do. I see we have a second round with Mike.
Thank you, sir. Eugene is one of the most innovative cities in one of the most innovative pioneer states in the country, and I am very proud of that. I think that's something everybody should be proud of. But our job is to wear the striped shirts and make sure that it's a level playing field for everybody. And so I think I don't know yet, I'd like to go through the public hearing, but I may have language around this that says this is okay to do for all licensed taxi services or licensed public, passenger vehicles, to make sure that we make that distinction very clearly. Uber as a company has gone into many markets across the country and has never left one that it entered, ever. So we're going to be dealing with this for a while, and we're going to have to do it the right way. And frankly, from my perspective, we ought to do it sooner rather than later. We have a duty to provide that fair and level playing field for everybody here. And it's not only because we need to keep people safe and because we need to make sure that the public doesn't get gouged, but there are other issues that are an important part of this. We can't just kind of get to it at some point, from my perspective. As Claire mentioned, there's the issue around the airport. Right now, we charge every taxi cab that pulls up at the airport a fee. The city does. It's city revenue that we get from them being allowed to do that. And we don't charge that of Uber or any of the newer rideshare type services at this time. So why would somebody pay that when they don't have to? And I mean, that's coming up, as I understand it, for discussion again. And why would any taxi company agree to do it? Why wouldn't they just tell you, forget about it, we're not doing it anymore? If they don't have to, why should we? So I think we have to get up on top of this sooner than we're planning on. Another issue is that we rely on taxi service in our community to deal with a lot of things for folks who are in some of the most difficult positions in our community. Rideshare and many other places for people to get to the doctor, for our elderly to get to the grocery store, to get to emergency doctor visits, rely on the taxi cab service. And if we allow a company to come in and operate unlicensed and run them out of business, those folks are at the mercy of someone who's going to take advantage of them, and we can't allow that. So I want to see us move quickly on this.
Thank you. I will ask Claire to put the motion on the table.
I move to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing on an ordinance to modify the code as described in Attachment A.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising their hands. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. That was great work, and it is the first of what will be an ongoing conversation. Thank you very much. With that, we have no more business for the council work session. I declare it closed.